Okay, well, welcome everybody. And this is part 2 of our pastel exploration. Yesterday we did soft pastels. Today we're going to do oil pastels. And one of the things I realized last night was that as I'm working and all that, you really don't see the materials beforehand. So I thought I'd take the opportunity. This is a set of 24. They come in sets of 12, 24, 36, and so on. And I often would like to have a whole set of all my art supplies in my living room that are unused because I just like to look at them. They're so nice. All right, so those are the oil pastels. And then if we have time, I want to briefly talk about, there are also oil pastels that come in metallic colors. And so those look exceptionally nice on black paper. So we'll see how far we get. So there's a difference, of course, between soft pastels, oil pastels. Soft pastels are much powdery. They have a lot more of, when you start using them, all the little powder gets all over the place if you're not too careful. The oil pastels have a much more stiff consistency, and so there's certain techniques that you will apply with those that work best for those, and then some of the things that we talked about with the soft pastels, they wouldn't be quite as effective because they're just an entirely different material. So today we're going to do, I was debating about whether doing another object, or a lot of times I use the oil pastels for doing more kind of outdoor drawing of flowers and things like that. So I decided to combine them. So I believe maybe in the chat room or someplace floating around is a photograph of, or an image of what my still life setup is today. So that way, if you want to download it or take a look at it as I'm working, then you can actually see what I'm working on instead of like the little bit that's at the top of the screen as I'm working. So why don't we switch over to the other camera and we'll get started. Okay. All right, so here's my setup. I've got a fairly simple little plastic toy. As I explained yesterday, one of the things that I have done over many years is collect these odd little things. And so before I get rid of them, I want to draw them. So I'm using this as an opportunity to get rid of a lot of stuff in my house. But I also went out into my garden and I picked a bunch of flowers and put them in a makeshift vase there. And that'll be, kind of what we'll work on. But before we actually start working on that particular drawing, and if you have your materials at hand, if you want to kind of follow along with some of the little experiments I'm going to do, then you might get a better idea. If at any time you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll answer them either then, or if you want to wait to the end, if we have a little extra time, I can answer them then as well. Okay, so let's get started. Now, the thing about the oil pastels, again, they are different than the soft pastels. First, the shape is a bit different. Like the other ones we were using, the soft pastels are more kind of a rectangular construction. They have kind of edges and sharps. These are basically round, but you still have this really nice kind of edge to it. So if you want to do some lines, or if you want to kind of sketch things in, to kind of get started, you can do that very lightly. It's kind of like the same thing with the other pastel technique. There are a variety of ways that you can blend them and manipulate them, but usually start off with some kind of a quick sketch or whatever. I got tape up there, so it's not going to work very well. I didn't plan this out quite as well, but you can kind of see what I'm doing. So very lightly, you can do some preliminary sketches. All right. Now, as you apply these, all right, so again, light is a big factor for me when I'm trying to create something in terms of an illusionary space. If you're just kind of doing more geometric patterns or something more abstract, then not everything applies to that application. But, you know, we'll start that little kind of ring around our clown there. I'll start putting it in. I'll be kind of aware of where the highlight areas are. But I'm using a paper that has a slight grain to it, and similar to the soft pastels, it's kind of nice to have that because then it gives you an opportunity to get a little speckling and all that. So the harder I press, of course, the darker the color. All right. Now, when you blend colors, let's get some down here. Put kind of a good concentration. And let's blend that into yellow. Now with the soft pastels, I found going from light into dark works best, but I have found that with oil pastels, for me, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. So your finger can be a very helpful tool to have in blending, and you can see that as I go across, I get a very nice intense color. All right. Now you can use your finger, you can use a chamois cloth, you can use, you know, some foam. Let me reach over here and get my piece here. You know, I mean, not being too familiar with makeup, I've been told that this is the same stuff that you might be able to find in a makeup thing, but you know, can also use one of these to help. This is kind of a harder, more firm kind of foam rubber thing. And what the advantage of this is that you've got nice sharp edges. So if I want to come up in here and start getting a little more detail, and something like this can be very helpful as I come around then. Sometimes if I use my finger, then my finger is a little bit broader than the area that I really want to kind of get into. But I like really saturating the paper, even if it's just a lighter concentration, and try to maintain a little bit of the texture. It just kind of gives you more options of what you can do. All right. So in blending, it's pretty much the same with the soft pastels, other than you really don't have to worry. I've found out in my own use of them that going from a darker to a lighter color, you can kind of go either direction. It doesn't make a lot of problems. Now, some of the things that you can do, I mean, again, if you've tried some of your pastels out, I mean, you can keep on building them up and building them up and building them up, so you get really thick layers. Now, if you're in a situation where perhaps you don't want quite that much on it, you can take a straight edge razor blade and you can scrape quite a bit of that off. And if you really are kind of desperate and there's an area that you really want to repair, then again, you could use your fixative, put a light coat on it. Again, when you're using the fixative, you want to make sure that you have good ventilation. So do it outside or do it where you have an exhaust fan or something like that, just to protect yourself from harm from chemicals. But you could spray that and that will seal it, and then you can work on top of it. Now, even though these are pretty opaque, they still will allow some of what's down below to come through. But if let's say I had that original amount in through there and I tried putting a lighter color on top of it, then depending on how much pressure I'd use, they'd start to mix. If you scrape it off, you have less interaction between, you know, because you just don't have that much of a material there to mix with the new stuff. And so we'll just kind of put some of this on that. Maybe you want to kind of tint the yellow a little bit more. Okay, so that's going to liven that up a little bit more. I can spread it out. Okay. Now the other thing that you can do too, and this kind of works, let's since we're going to be doing some leaves and stuff. With the soft pastels, in my own work, I try to get something that is a little more kind of almost like photographic, with hardly any marks and hardly any variations in the marking. And again, what I'll do is maybe pull one of the soft pastel examples I showed yesterday. So when you look at this, there's a photo of it, but it's a pretty good reproduction of it. Yeah, you really don't see any heavy marks, anything like an expressionistic or pointillistic approach. But I found what I like about the oil pastel, because they do have very distinctive marks and they're less apt to kind of dissipate. They'll maintain those marks. I kind of like taking advantage of those. And so a lot of my oil pastel pieces are a little bit more lively in terms of mark making. And so I suggest that you just practice with the marks and see what kind of things you can make. And I also finally get involved with a lot of movement. Instead of being real cautious and gradual about it, a lot of times I kind of come in. And so if you're working on a series of branches or something that have leaves, instead of very meticulously drawing each leaf, I find that if you make strokes, so if I go like that, I can get a leaf that has a vein down the center of it. I can take another color and then kind of emphasize that. And I could get that to blend. Another trick that you can do when you're doing leaves, if you have a leaf like in here, there's kind of a nice bright vein that goes down in through there. And to try to get color on either side of it and maintain that sometimes is a little difficult. So a lot of times I'll take a white. This is one of Faber-Castell's polychromos color pencils, and these are oil-based, so they're completely compatible with these. But if I go ahead and draw like the vein of that leaf or of a leaf in the white, then when I go over it with some green here, you can see the way that starts to pop out. So, if this is going to be the leaf shape, and you can see how that white line acts as a resist. So as I go over it with the oil pastel, that'll pop out. Another thing you can do in thinking about how to get textures, you can group things together. You can group marks together. And you can do this with soft pastel as well. But what's nice about this, and it probably doesn't show up so much on the camera, but you get a nice density here, and then you come out and you get a little more of a texture. And I think that adds to a particular visual aspect. And you can just keep on layering and layering and layering. So you get some really nice kind of complex textures and whatnot if you do that type of thing. The other thing too is like the way, since this is round, it's very easy to kind of twirl. Let me get a slightly lighter green here. So I can start with a lot of pressure, kind of twirl it, lighten it up, and then as I add more pressure to it, you can see the way it goes from thin to thick. I could even come back, make it a little bit thicker. So sometimes if you're doing organic forms like leaves or stems and stuff, it's kind of nice to practice with the flow of it and lighten up on the pressure, push a little more down, a little bit more up, and so forth. I could follow that with a slightly lighter color. Yep. And kind of mimic the same thing, then, and then come up in here like that, and like that, and like that. And then if I do a little blending, that's going to start kind of giving it a nice feel for the light on a stem or something like that. All right. Now, the other thing I like doing, like for instance, in this flower up and through here, when you kind of think about drawing the flowers, let me get a yellow out. And in our mind, we're thinking a flower like that has petals that come out like this and has a center. And especially, when you're a kid and you're drawing flowers, tulips, things like that, is very much like this. You're kind of showing kind of the mental idea of what the flower is. But when you really kind of observe these things, it's more like that. When this gets tilted, then you have a certain thing that'll work. Let me put this piece over.
Hi, Franz. We actually have a question.
Yes.
Do oil pastels need time to dry?
No. I mean, they eventually over a lot of years, but I mean, they're kind of set so that, they're not going to set up completely the way that maybe oil paint does until after quite some time. Eventually, the oil will dry up on them. And so that makes them, in some aspects, a lot more durable, because with the soft pastel, if you haven't put fixative on it, you just have to take your hand and go over it, and you pretty much have made a great alteration. But with the oil pastels, they have a tendency to be pretty resilient on the surface. So if I, kind of put something in through here, unless I use a lot of pressure, if I just, kind of put my hand across it, there's no obvious change in that. In fact, even on my hand, I don't have any. I really have to add a lot of pressure to get that to start to move. And even then, sometimes it takes a little bit of heat from my hand. And, if you're working with oil pastels in a very cold room, you might want to have a hair dryer to actually kind of try to soften them up a little bit. Okay, so, yeah. So if you think about drawing a flower, actually, let's draw a red flower or something so it'll show up on the camera a little better. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of imagine a box, and you do the diagonals, you find the center. So then like that, and then you've got these leaves or these petals that kind of come out like that. Okay. So as you take that and start as this flower, instead of looking straight at it, it's as if you're looking straight on it, but then you've tilted it. And so it's about that angle. So that square becomes more kind of like a trapezoid type thing, like that. And then again, find the center here. And the center of this is really pretty fat. And this becomes an ellipse. And then those petals are kind of coming out like this. And then when they get to the back, in some cases, maybe you don't even see, this is so high that it goes above where the petals are. So when you're drawing a flower that is, kind of centered and then has the petals coming off, then you want to kind of look at it and really see. Now, if I look at this one, and I think from your view too, it's almost like a hat where it kind of is a little kind of conical center. And then there's kind of like a ring of where the petals come out. And you don't even see what's behind that. And so if you can train yourself to kind of be looking at how that works, and then, the stem comes down in through here someplace, then if you're going after a more realistic presentation, as it might be like that, those are just some drawing things that you need to be aware of, so that instead of always trying to draw, your flowers, if you're looking straight down at it, think, well, what happens if I'm looking almost at it, if I'm looking at it kind of askance or whatever. And so it'll help you out with that. Okay, other things that you can be thinking about, in addition to building up colors by smearing them together, blending them together. Again, the example might be that, if I have a green, light green, and I want it to go into a dark green, I can take my finger, I can take a paper towel, I can take, something. And again, as you experiment with this, I find that, my finger has a tendency, I really have to rub pretty hard to get it to work. And with putting paper towel on top of it, the extra bit of the paper helps drag everything across. Now, the other thing that I can do now, if I want to kind of put a little more coloration here to make that a little bit darker, make my own tone. So layering colors can really extend your palette. And you can also use the same Tortillons, the paper stumps that we use for the soft pastel. And I'll make sure that you kind of clean them off. Get those work. Well, obviously I didn't clean that one off enough, but use one of these. And I'm going to build it up just a little bit more. And then you can do kind of sgraffito techniques. You could take something like an X-Acto knife. And you don't want to use excessive pressure because you don't want to tear the paper. But I can come through here. And if I want to kind of lighten that up a little bit, I can just take my X-Acto knife or some other kind of blade. And I'm just very lightly, I'm just scraping a pastel off. So if you have something like, again, like, like a leaf. Okay, I'm going to put it on kind of heavy here. Same thing applies for the leaves. Think about if you had to put them up like on a rectangle box or something, what happens when you tilt it? What are the different angles, or, what happens with it? I'm going to make it a little darker, maybe on the edges here. Because in my view, as it tilts down, it gets, it also has like a little jagged kind of edge here. Okay, I'm just going to get that in a little bit, Okay, so if that's my basic leaf shape there, I noticed that, as I mentioned before, it has one spine that goes through that's very bright, and then it also has some other kind of vein patterns. So I can come in here, and I can lighten that up. Put myself in an awkward position here. Now with the oil pastels, I have a tendency to work flat on the table, but I found that it shows up a little bit better on camera for you to see what I'm doing. But so now I've been able to make it this so it's a little more regular and smooth. So now, instead of trying to leave that white space, I could have done that too when I'm applying the oil pastel. I could have tried to leave as much of the paper coming through as possible, but when I scratch it out, it's this isn't totally white. It's kind of a light green, and even if I want to, I could, if I want to make it a little more accentuated, since I scraped most of it off, I could go ahead and then kind of touch it up with some white here, however you feel like it's going to work the best. But I find that a lot of times I kind of like just using a technique where I kind of come through and I get these I get much smaller lines with a blade that I can never do with the pastel. So if that looks a little too graphic, then I have my clean finger. I can soften that a little bit so it looks less like a scratch and it's starting to look a little bit more like, what's actually in the leaf. And, if I look even more closely at the leaf, there's a whole network of those things. So I can make some of these lines a little more pronounced by scratching through. And then some of the other ones I can just barely. And especially if you kind of view that from a distance, then that's going to read very much as kind of like a texture rather than scratches. Other things that you can do if you want to blend things together a bit. I'll go over a few more things and then we'll actually kind of apply them to the still life. But I got some baby oil. It's hard to find just plain mineral oil. So a lot of times, mineral oil is in baby oil and it works fine. And so I'm just taking a Q-tip. You could use a brush, you could use, anything that you want. Q-tips work really nicely. And then I can almost get kind of a painterly blending with this. And then, if you want to, you could take a brush and pick that up and move it around. So you can blend things that way as well. Now, this is going to be a very thin coat. It's going to be very vibrant. It's going to do a really nice job of soaking into the whole paper. But you want to wipe it down to try to get the excess oil off so it isn't just soaked. And then, that gives you an opportunity to kind of move things around a little more fluidly, perhaps. Let's see. Erasers, they're a little less effective just because the oil is a little harder to kind of remove, but it is possible, but you'll probably do more smearing than anything else. This is a vinyl eraser. And again, this is something that you might think about using as a way to kind of get the blended and a little bit thinner. Now, like the soft pastels, I could, again, let's assume that I have good ventilation. I just give that a little spritz. Give it half a second to dry. And it'll take just a little bit longer to dry because it's on top of something that it's not being absorbed into the paper as much as like when you're working with the soft pastels. But once that dries, you're still going to be able to kind of see that color coming through a little bit because the pastels aren't totally opaque, but it'll keep them from mixing together. So if I come up into something like that, if I really press, what I'm doing is kind of getting this gray color because of the orange and the green, which is very nice if I want like kind of a subtle shadow, and then you get this bright orange to come through. So that can be very effective, but it's physically blending with the pastel underneath it. When you hit it with a spray fixative, that's dry yet, yeah. So I'm still seeing what's underneath and it's still coming through, but I'm not getting as muddy a color because it's not physically mixing with the pigment underneath. It's more of an optical blend where the layer that I'm putting on top of that isn't quite opaque, so I'm getting a little bit coming through. Okay, so a few other things that I occasionally will do. You can use a blade to get, it's a little bit better if you're working on a vertical surface, on a horizontal surface, but I can shave this a little bit. Well, let me do it down here and then I'll pick it up. You can actually kind of start constructing shapes and colors. And these are, they make these all sorts of shapes and sizes and whatnot. But you can pick these up. Or I imagine this being on the ground. I didn't think about this, but I can then start to kind of move those around and I can start kind of constructing thicker areas of pigment by shaving and then applying with one of these brushes. Again, it's a little challenging. I'm doing this vertically, but all right, maybe if I get a little bit of, there we go. All right, well, I guess it's one of those things I'll have you take my word for it. I also have various tools. Maybe I can go to work this way. There we go. Yeah. So a lot of times you can kind of manipulate your oil pastel, again, because it has that body to it. I can kind of move it around with this, like a little ceramic tool. and I can pat things down. I can get textures. I can get real subtle little transitions. You can stipple. You can do all sorts of stuff that way. Okay, so that basically are some of the techniques. I really encourage you to experiment and just see what kind of marks you can make. Go with the energy of the stroke. You don't always have to kind of do real fine little things. You can be very physical with it in the way that you kind of work with the pastels. All right, so let's start applying some of these characteristics to the actual drawing. And I've gone ahead and sketched some of the stuff out from the still life here just to save a little bit of time. So let's work on maybe this flower here. And I'll start off with a lighter color. And I generally kind of go from light to dark. And because I figure they can always put darker colors on top. And I can lighten darker colors, but you know, if I want just a real pure kind of bright light color first, that seems to help. Okay. Okay. And as I come up here, now again, I kind of like using the idea that I'm building up layers. A little extra there. Okay, so then I've got a slightly brighter kind of magenta type color. So I'm starting to look, yep, this guy's drooping a little bit. It's more like that. Okay, so as I look in, this is more in the light. And then as it goes up and through here, it gets a little bit darker. So I'll just start. And I'm not really trying to get these necessarily to blend, but I want to, and you can hear me kind of tapping. I like the soft pastel that I just kind of put some in and I move the color around. I like to just build up textures and thicknesses. So that's going to make that a little bit brighter. And then along this edge, it's a little bit. Okay, and then up and through here, it's a little bit darker yet. Okay, then I'll add a little more of a, maybe brighten that up just a little bit more yet. And I'll add just a little bit of red so that it kind of mixes with that other. Okay, I might decide to smear that together a little bit, but I mean, you kind of see that it's just a matter of going from light to dark. And try to get a feel for the form. Again, this is more of kind of a, more or less realistic approach to it. If you want to do patterns or something like that, if you don't necessarily want to draw them exactly as is, then you have that option as well. Okay. All right, so coming up on this one. Make the centers in through there a little bit darker. Right. And then it gets to be kind of a creamy color as it starts going closer to the stem. So like that. And then it gets to be kind of a nice maroon color as it kind of comes reddish maroon. So I'll put a little of that in there. Come back with some red on top of that, really make it a little more vibrant. So that becomes the stem. All right, so, again, going back and forth now, in through here, there's a shadow. So in order to get that feeling as a shadow, I don't want to go too far off the color range, but it's almost like what, from my view, there's a shadow that's kind of coming through there. Get rid of those little knobbies and spread that a little bit. And then the same thing is kind of happening here. There's a bit of a shadow that comes across there, around there. Get rid of all these little extra chunks. And so it's starting to look like something. Now there's just a tiny little bit of green that kind of comes in through here. And when you get a certain thickness of it and you're moving it around, it's almost like paint. It's almost like an oil paint, but you know, you're kind of manipulating a little bit different. Okay, and then this is still kind of like a purplish red stem as it comes down here. Okay, and then I'm going to get that to be a little bit darker. It's back in the shadows a bit, and I want to get confused with. Okay. All right, so let's work on one of the leaves. Let's leave on this one because I think it will show up the most. And I'm kind of, what I'm doing is I generally have a tendency to put a base color over everything, and then I go into the details, but I don't want us to kind of run out of time without being able to talk about some of the things that you can do in individual and try to get them finished instead of getting the thing halfway finished all over and miss out as an opportunity to kind of do some of the. Again, I'm not as there goes our still life. Sorry about that. I was getting a little too. All right, well, I'll just. Maybe we'll focus on the toy from now on. Now that I just. Okay, so. Okay, I can maybe very quickly reassemble things a little bit so you can use them as a reference. There's our leaf. Okay, well, we still have a bit of a reference there, and we'll put our poor flower over through there. Okay, so get working with the green now. So I've got the base coat. And I've got that line of symmetry comes up and through here. Okay, now on the other side of the leaf, it's a little bit lighter. I'm gonna make this a little bit darker in here. Okay, so we've got little kind of sawtooth edges, so I can very quickly kind of give that impression. Okay, and then through here, I'll put just a little bit more. Okay, now at this point, I can cut it, leave it, the texture rough like that, or what I might do instead is very lightly even it out just a little bit. I don't want to get too neutral. Again, I think one of the values of the oil pastels is that you get kind of really nice juicy layers. And then, as I had mentioned before, I could take some kind of a scratching tool. And I can get that white vein back through there again. And then if I look at the leaf here, kind of come around like this. Same way on this side. Okay, so as I back away from it, it's looking like a leaf. I can see where the veins are. Let's modify, well, let's get him kind of back up here a little bit. See if I can avoid another catastrophe there. I can at least get in. Well, here, we'll just move it like that. Then let's ask him for it. We'll move the leaves out and the flowers for a minute. Focus on him a little bit. Okay, so I'm very quickly going to kind of block. If you notice that you're picking up color, take a towel or something and take those extra things off because I don't want to pollute the color. So I'll get those on top. Got the red ring that comes around his face up here. Now, since this is plastic and it's not organic, what I will do is kind of work a little bit more at getting a consistent blend because I want to kind of capture the feeling for the smoothness of. There, a little yellow top up here. Now, as I'm looking at him, there we go. Paint's coming off a little bit in a couple of places, so it kind of shows up in spots. I'll come down one more level. I'll kind of get it to start working with the leaf a little bit. And the ring comes around, but we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, I do have a couple areas that the green polluted, so there's no problem. I just come in and get rid of it by very lightly scratching that away. Okay, I'm going to work a little bit on this side. There's a little bit more in. Just tie it up here. And down and through here. Just a little bit of a shadow around the edges of the button. Goes in. And then there's a real kind of slight shadow. This has like just a little kind of embossment. I don't want to get too much that. There we go, that. Okay, so I'll get a little bit of his nose in. Okay. Actually, good. Okay, he's got blue eyes. within my little accent. Oh, here they are. My pastel's kind of a little disorganized, but okay, now there are a couple little highlighted areas. Maybe to make those a little more obvious, I'll go over with a darker. Yeah. Okay. Now maybe I'll do a little creative work here, seeing how I kind of lost my still life material, but I'm going to put some more leaves in through here. Again, for right now, what I'm trying to do is block in the basic colors of the different shapes. And you have another stems coming through there. And then if I want to start developing up, some shadows in the background, where they're, the way that I had it arranged was a whole complexity of leaves and little crevices. So there are little bits of shadow here and there, and then the leaves that were on the front. Yeah, my pastels kind of went all over the place here, but we'll get it going. Okay, so look at some lighter leaves up here. All across here like this. Okay, I got that one flower that we can put up into there, and that one that was over here. Okay, now there, let's see if I can find my, right, so I like these flowers. It's they kind of come up and they have these really kind of furry stems, and then as it blooms, this kind of comes on down. You can see where each of those little beads kind of has a little highlight to it, and that's a little bit darker around it. So maybe you can throw one of those in quickly just to make something up. Okay, so instead of making a solid thing, I can kind of work on
Hi, Franz, it's me again. We have an
Yes.
interesting question.
Yes.
How do you keep your edges sharp while blending the area near it?
There are a variety of things that you can do. Let's say, I'm trying to pick an area out here. Let's say that underneath here, I had this vase and I want to keep that crisp. So a lot of times what I'll do, let's decide what color we're going to make that. Let's say we got stripes or something. All right. So the edge of your pastel is your friend. So for that, up against that edge of the leaf, I'll put that in first. Now, as far as blending, do you mean like, let's say that these rings would go, let's say that the light's shining at it. So over on this end, they're going to be darker and they're going to get lighter as they come across. Maybe we'll do one down here first, just as an example. So let's say that I want to have that gradually get a little bit lighter. And then it's going to get darker again. Okay, and then on top of that, let's put kind of this light peach. And go on top of that a little. So that's kind of what I want all the rings to look like. Now, at this point, you know, I could take my paper stomp, I could take a Q-tip. I probably won't use my finger because I've got paws rather than hands. So I can start kind of crisping that edge up a little bit with the Q-tip. What's nice, it has a kind of cotton on it, but the stem of it is kind of a nice hard, you know, if I peel the cotton thing off of it, the stump is hard enough, gives me enough pressure that I can move the oil pastel around. Okay, so I might want to get, yeah, I created quite a mess here with my gravitational disaster. I'll get that off. Okay, there we go. So I'll just build up a little bit more here. Take another Q-tip, or maybe in this case, I might actually take a tool. I'm moving some of my excess pigment, and now I'm actually manipulating it with this tool to conform to the edge. So it gives it a crisp edge up against that leaf. And once I've done that, then I'll kind of work away from it. And then over here, I want to make this darker. So I'll turn my tool this way so I can take advantage of that nice crisp edge. And then I'm going to work it across. Again, if I want to clean that up a little bit, I can just scrape that off. Okay, now go back up here again. So that's kind of the effect that I want. I want it to go from darker to lighter. I could even add a little bit of white to that to try to get that to be more kind of a highlight. Okay, so this, I'm using the sharp edge so I can go right up to the edge of the leaf and then come across. And I'm going to keep that fairly intense and dark in through there because it's underneath the leaf. And I could actually even add maybe something a little bit darker just to make it appear. Now, part of the blending occurs if I mean, you can keep on hearing me tap, 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 tap. It's me kind of applying the pigment so it's thick. So instead of just kind of going up and down and just drawing across, I'm just picking it up, putting it down, picking it up, putting it down. And then once I get that established, I come back with, one of my tools. In fact, this might be a good time to use one of these brushes. I can come through and I can blend into the orange that I put there originally. And because of the shape of the tip that I'm using here, you can see how it comes to a point. So that means then I can really get up close and get that to blend through. And I can pull it away from the edge. So I guess, what I would say is that when you get the pigment, the pastel, up against the edge, then draw away from it. So then that way you'll be able to really kind of keep a crisp edge. And then, of course, like down here, if we decide that we're going to make it into kind of like an orange and blue thing. I'll do the same thing. I'll lighten up a little bit, and then I'll get a little darker when I come over and through here. So I'm coming right up to the edge. I'm putting that pigment where it needs to go, so it keeps that edge really crisp. And then to blend, I will go from there across. And I'll make sure that if I'm going to use this tool again, I want to make sure that I clean it so I don't have any of the residue. Now with the soft pastel, it's less apt to cling to things. With oil pastel, it has a viscosity that makes it want to cling. I could also use my eraser to help blend things. I'm not really putting a lot of pressure on it, but it's a little firmer, so I might be able to get it to come through. And again, sharp edge, so that if I want it to abut that stripe up above it, I can play off that edge. Okay, does that make sense? Does that answer the question? So it depends on how crisp you want everything to be. And then that would determine how kind of meticulous you have to be. So notice maybe I want to add just a little bit more across here. I like, instead of having the kind of the shadow areas look like I've added black or something to it, sometimes it's just experimenting with the color a little bit. And then if I can find my, oh, here it is. Now you can also, you don't have to keep the wrappers on. I mean, if you want to apply broad strokes, if you didn't have the wrapper, one thing that's nice about the wrapper, it'll tell you what color it is. So, you can replace it or you could match it with something else. But in here, instead of like, necessarily putting black to make a shadow or something, if I take this red and I put it up against that edge, and the same thing up here, maybe, it gives it a glow. It really kind of makes it acts as a shadow, but it also will make it glow. And those are the type of things that I really enjoy. And if I'm, kind of really working out how things look on the plastic, there are a lot of white highlights. But then also, if I look at the shadows, instead of thinking, well, it's just a darker yellow, sometimes a little bit like this red that it's up against will bounce back. So instead of having this be kind of like a dark all the way across, I can see that there's some reflected light on this yellow. So it's actually kind of an orange color in through there. So in other words, like, it's not necessarily right here that this is happening in reality, but I'll show you kind of a little bit about what I mean. It's like, instead of trying to make that look like a darker yellow, sometimes if I add a little color like that, and again, maybe come in and work it into the yellow a bit. It'll kind of give it that feeling for a volume, but it also gives it a little bit of a glow so that you can see that it's having light reflected. Again, in here, this is more kind of like a greenish color, but then as it comes down, but since we haven't got through there, I'm trying to save us a little time because I know we're getting close to being over. Well, so are there any other questions? Yeah, I hope that in spite of my little disaster there with our still life, so I'll just continue to kind of work in the darks. So as I kind of apply some dark green in there, it's popping the edge of the flower out. And the more that I work on those type of things, contrasting values, light against dark, light comes forward, the dark will go back. And if you contrast it against the bright color, then that's going to make that pop out. So I can really start kind of developing it so that you get a whole array of color, but it's those values going from light and dark that will kind of start creating a space. And it still is somewhat flat, but it does have kind of a spatial relationship, overlapping. The fact that this is overlapping gives you the bottle shape or the vase shape, and that's going to bring that forward. You can put shadows underneath it. So it's just a matter of playing with the material, getting used to what oil pastels can do. I'm very happy with the way that the leaf is starting to develop. It really has a nice feeling for the shape and the lighting of it, and that helps describe the form. And then with the scratches in through there for the veins, it also enhances it. If you have an object that is like a cylinder, let's say, and you have a shadow or something that's coming across here, as it goes across that curved surface, it follows the surface of that. And the same thing happens with these veins that, if you look at it straight on, then maybe you get a vein pattern that looks like this. If you look at it more at kind of this level where it goes back, but the front dips down a little bit, that vein goes up and then it comes over here. And then those other veins help describe that surface. So not only do you have an opportunity to come in with darker colors to help give it form, if I want to make that kind of pop back even more so, I can take a little bit of blue and put that on top. So I think a lot of the success with these oil pastels is being willing to experiment and see about layering. And so the layering of the color. So just by adding that bit of the blue, it's really going to make that flower pop out a little bit more. So, look at how things are progressing, decide, what needs to come forward, what needs to go back. Up here, I'm taking the light coming in this way. So I'm not going to draw each one of those little things, but these characteristic marks that I'm making are a good substitute for meticulously drawing each one of them. And if I'm thinking about the light coming this way and apply it, and then the rest of it comes down, and those little things are green. So I'm just very quickly kind of making little marks, little gestures, and then I'll come back with a darker green and do the same thing, add a little bit of texture to it to simulate the plants. And then I have a very dark green someplace. Well, I'll use blue again. And then I can kind of come back and get the clumps to separate a little bit. So yeah, within a very short period of time, there I've got one of these little cone flowers. And I kind of talked about up here, this one. This is like the center. And then the petals come across this way. It's high enough that you don't see what's underneath it. Okay, so there we got that flower in. And then I could do the same thing with it. It's very there's a really nice texture to it. It's got a shadow across it. So I could come back here and do a little bit of stippling, give you a feeling for the form and seeds. And then there's a shadow that kind of comes in through here. So I think in, yeah, a relatively short period of time, you can really start making things kind of come out. And it's just a matter of working with the textures, the volume, value of the color, light against dark, and all that good stuff. But most things, you know, what I would recommend, get some scrap paper, really play around with the pastels and see how they react. Try a variety of techniques to see what you want to do with them, and then get started on something. Are there any final questions or anything? Okay, well, that's the story of pastels, soft and oil, from yesterday and today. And I think if you, yeah, it takes a little bit to kind of get accustomed to the characteristics. And once you get on your way, I think you really enjoy them. I had mentioned yesterday that I never was real fond of pastels until I was in a situation where I really had to kind of get to figure them out. And once I did, it's one of my favorite things to work with. Okay, well, thank you for putting up with my disaster, and hope that you have fun. And we'll see you next time.